Hey, welcome back to the Nailsin ratings. Well, I had nothing better to do, so I figured, hey, why not do another Doctor Who video? I hadn't done one in a while because there's no Doctor Who to talk about, except, well, I guess the Big Finish stuff. But the regular television series won't be back till later this fall. And the only thing is a few behind-the-scenes stuff that we've seen. You can look for them all around. And, of course, the new logo is all snazzy and fancy looking. And I've done my own little workup version here for the purposes of my video. And so that apparently is how the Doctor Who title will look as the show opens, whatever design they do. I didn't have a problem with the Capaldi opening, but I did not like the song that... I just, that was bad. So even though Capaldi is my favorite of the new Doctors, no, not a fan of that, among other things that went wrong. But hopefully they'll get it better. But anyway, yes, last Christmas the Doctor turned into a woman. So how did that happen? Well, that's what this is going to be about. Discussing what the possibilities of the continuity and what evidence is there to make a case for how this fits in with Time Lord's regeneration abilities. And what I'm guessing at and what I think they probably should apply because it fits with what they've already presented. And but I don't expect them to do so. I think they'll just do whatever pops in their head and move on. I can't say that Doctor Who has been as horrible to its continuity as Star Trek has with Star Trek Discovery, which basically just threw it in the trash and moved on there. There's some serious damage to Doctor Who continuity from the past series, whatnot, and yeah, I guess that's another video. But here, the Doctor regenerating into a woman really doesn't do much, if any damage to the continuity, because Doctor Who, there's a lot of gender switching in pop culture these days because people chalk it up as some sort of feminist achievement when it's just a cheap stunt. But with Doctor Who, it fits and works within the science fiction continuity of the series as it's been established, that the Time Lords have this ability to regenerate their bodies. It doesn't just repair whatever damage that's been happening to them, whether they got too old or they're sick or they were wounded or what have you. It changes them entirely with what the process does so that they look completely different, even to the point of being taller and shorter, and in a couple of cases, one case particular, a little chubby, stuff like that. And of course, you can imagine that if every physical element of your body is shifting around and changing as it's repairing whatever damage was done to it, this is going to shift the brain around. And even though the memories are all intact, the Doctor has all the memories of his previous selves and everything. He's a different man and a different personality because of the shifting around. And for the classic series, the original one that ran from 63 to 89, there was no gender swapping of Time Lords. There was a scene in which there was ethnicity swapped in the last episode of the John Pertwee Doctor, The Planet of the Spiders, where his mentor regenerates into a new version of himself. And the new version was of a different ethnicity than the original. The original was an old white man, and then he regenerates into what appears to be a Tibetan man, Asian man. And now, granted, both actors were white men, but that's how they did things back then. What are you going to do? But for the purposes of the continuity and canon of the story, this shows that, yes, you can your appearance can be that of a different race than what the previous incarnation had been, because we all come from an original ancestral species of what have you, and it splinters out over time. But so by now we probably should have had a black doctor by now, at least that. Other than like a comedy sketch here or there, it never happened. So that's already established, but gender swapping, no, that didn't happen in the original series. It was suggested outside of the show. Tom Baker made a joke about that. when he left the show about who his successor could possibly be. I wish him or her well, all that. Then there was Sydney Newman, who's basically got the show started back in '63, but the show was dying and in dire need of something. It was in terrible shape because the scripts were really bad. It wasn't because of the actors. They did as good as they could do with what they had, but boy, the storylines and stuff were really, I'm sorry, they just weren't any good. It deteriorated over the 80s. And plus, there were people within the BBC apparently just really didn't care for the show and wanted it gone. And so there it went. But Sydney Newman suggested, hey, you could have a woman play the Doctor. And the idea would be this would be some kind of buzz and curiosity factor and hype that might pump up the show. And it probably would have, but that's not enough to save a dying show like that. So I don't think it would have done much than what ended up happening with Sylvester McCoy. So anyway, that's about it. There really wasn't anything in continuity within the storyline of that sort of thing happening. But if you could change between ethnicity because of the DNA signatures of flow that's within a body, that's in, that record and that sequence is in there somewhere to where other percentages of a distant race or what have you that you could possibly change into, because that sequence is in there. So the rearranging of your DNA and the molecular structure and whatever else happens during regeneration, it's conceivable to think that, that could come out in one of the incarnations and as it regenerates. So if that can happen, then the idea of changing gender is not all that far-fetched. In fact, it's probably more likely that could happen because we all come from a mother and father. So the sequence of a female body is there even in a male body. But the interesting thing here is what's the typical form, what's the dominant frame or pattern, I guess, of the Time Lord's body over time during the regeneration cycles. And for the Doctor, it's male. It's established again and again here, and it pretty much nailed shut in the last episode of Capaldi's Doctor, where he meets the first Doctor. And he flat out says, oh, my God, this is it. This is the first time I regenerated, And when he meets his first self, he's almost about to regenerate into, the second Doctor. And so that's the stab. It had always been kind of theorized that maybe the Doctor had other regenerations before that, and that the reason the first Doctor is called the first Doctor is only because that's when he started to call himself the Doctor, because it's not his real name and all that. Well, no, scrap all that. This seals the deal. He talks about that this is the first time it happened, and it also explains why the first Doctor was reluctant to do it in that story, because he's scared. He's never done it before, and so that was his objection to it, whereas Capaldi's Doctor had just had enough. He'd been doing it for so long, and it's only supposed to have happened for 12 times, but he's gotten an extra little boost from the Time Lords, and so who knows how long this cycle is. Maybe it's just another 12 years, or maybe it's less. I don't know. They haven't really figured that out yet about how these news cycles go, which creates some problems, but that's another video. So evidence that gender swapping within the regeneration cycles is rare, I think, is throughout the story. Now, was it intentional? Probably not, because so we got Jodie Whittaker doing the role now for the new series, and should the show survive, I mean, the numbers aren't good, but should it survive when she's ready to move on, who would the replacement be? Odds are it would be a man. Now I'll explain this. The actual first time we really get an inkling that this gender swapping and regenerations is possible is with the Matt Smith Doctor. Right off the bat, when he regenerates for a brief moment, when he's regenerating from David Tennant into Matt Smith, for a brief moment, he suspects he's regenerated into a woman. And he's horrified at the prospect. He's not too happy about it. But then he realizes, oh, no, that's not, I'm still a man. So why that? You know, boy, all this, boy, let's just ignore that for today's gender politics at BBC, huh? But you can see how he's used to being a man. He's always been a man, but the possibility of regeneration makes it possible that he could become a woman. Right, this would be all new for him. So you could imagine it would be, and I was kind of hoping they might touch on that with the Jodie Whittaker, where she has to ease into this to become herself, which would fit with all the other stories, because the first stories off for the new doctors, they're adjusting to this new person they've become, and it's not all that easy for them. And then by the end, you know, they fit into it, and then they're off, you know, and everything works out. So more so here, because it's never happened before. So this is all just a big smile and brilliant. I would say that kind of fits in with the idea of the attitude where the doctor was at that point, you know, where he was almost suicidal with a depression and what have you. And he's, all right, okay, I'm not going to go one more time. And he regenerates, and then he's turned into a woman. So it's kind of like, oh, okay, you know, Cosmos, you got me. This is hilarious. So you can kind of read it like that. It's very brief, so I don't know how they're going to handle that. But anyway, so his primary pattern is male, and then this happens to him. So the next time we hear about the gender swapping is, of course, when the master is revealed to have gender swapped, regenerated into Missy at some point. And we later find out when all that happened. But anyway, so Missy was kind of this mysterious figure, but it was blatantly obvious. I mean, right off the bat, oh, the master's a woman now. But anyway, the big reveal happens where Missy admits, you know, she says, I couldn't go on calling myself the master anymore, now could I? And the doctor's reaction to this, he's stunned, you know, he's this shocked look on his face. He can't believe this, you know, for a brief moment there. And he's just, what? You know, which is weird, because like I said, the following of continuity is a bit lazy in Doctor Who and not quite there, because previously the 10th Doctor had discovered the Master still existed, and the Master regenerated, but he didn't see what the Master looked like in his new form. And when he and his companions get back to London looking for him, well, how are we going to find him? You know, and the Doctor says, a Time Lord always knows, you know, another Time Lord. Even when they change face, they recognize each other. Well, I guess if they gender swap, you don't. I don't know, because the Doctor had no idea that Missy was the Master until she told him so. So it was a bit odd. I'm not, but I guess as it happens, you have to conclude that that's why. The only other thing was that we now know that, yes, she is indeed a regenerated form of the Master. This isn't some body that the Master stole like he had done in the past when his old body wasn't any good anymore, like he did with Tree Mass and all that, and Eric Roberts. But anyway, so it's like, oh, maybe he stole another body. No, this was a regeneration. So, but the Doctor just didn't recognize her. So I'm guessing, well, maybe the gender swap confuses that a bit, so they don't quite recognize each other. I don't know, because I'm kind of wondering when the female Doctor, if she meets another Time Lord at some point, maybe the Master himself, you know, whatever, they won't recognize her yet. I don't know. But it's an interesting little a deviation from the standard that is they set within the new Who. You know, it's like something they forgot from an old classic show that Tennant said, hey, a Time Lord always knows. But so there you go. It's a little odd, but it's an interesting little thing. And if they maintain it, you can say, well, when the gender swaps, it's a little bit difficult at first for them to recognize each other. So the other evidence of there's a dominant pattern where the Doctor is male. If you took a Time Lady like Romana, she's primarily a woman, but it's possible at some point Romana could become a man. Why won't they bring her back? I don't know. But another example was in the Capaldi episode where the Time Lord General, he had to shoot in order to try to save Clara. and the Time Lord General regenerates. Now, the first thing that she does when she becomes a woman is she gets up and she admits that the male incarnation that she had just had and regenerated from was the only time she had ever been a man. She had almost always, well, except for that one time, she had been a woman, all her life. And then for whatever reason, when she regenerated into that guy, she wakes up, she's a man. And of course, she had to put in the misandrous language. I mean, look, when you're preaching about sexism, it doesn't do much good to use sexism to fight sexism. So, of course, the little line about how do you deal with the ego? And of course, you're so worried about getting that line in there for your preaching, it takes away from the context of the character. Where, well, don't you know you were that man? How did you deal with the ego or whatever, the testosterone, the toxic masculinity, whatever the hell your misandrous mind tells you have to say? It takes one out of the story. It's a bad idea about how to do his stories, and I really hope they abandon that kind of crap for this female doctor to work. But yeah, that's just a side here. It's really stupid. But, there you go. If you're going to be anti-sexism, you need to be consistent with it. Otherwise, you defeat the whole purpose. So, anyway, but that establishes that where this was a time lady, for her pattern is female. It's not male. But the possibility of becoming male, of course, is there. It happened. And then she regenerated back into a woman. And she's like, back to normal, and then that's the way it is. Gee, do you think in the hyper gender politics, gender identity crap that goes on, will they allow a male successor for Jodie Whittaker's doctor? And for him to say, back to normal? No, probably not. Even though it would make sense. As what they've established here, probably unwittingly, and which means they won't follow it, to where gender swapping, as I said, is rare. So that it could be a while before there's another female doctor. There's also something to point out that the doctor's regenerations are not normal now because he's already gone beyond the limit that normally that Time Lords have. So by him continuing on forever, the likelihood of gender swapping becomes more likely because, he's just going to keep doing it. So eventually the sequence could come around again. So, yeah, depending on how long the show survives or what have you. So there you go. Based on what events have already been told within the Doctor Who universe, I think my theory is pretty sound. And so that would basically all it means is that when Miss Whittaker moves on, her successor would most likely be male. I suppose you could go ahead for another race if they wanted to do that. But for the purposes of maintaining a believable continuity with what is already established there, and especially since the Doctor has gone through the normal Time Lord cycle with all these men, it begs it's stretching it a bit much to say that it just happens all the time. No, it would have happened by now. So I think that would fit for it. And to go beyond that is just adding more to the idea of preaching gender identity politics and stuff like that at the cost of story and the credibility within its own continuity. The problem is when it's someone who only wants something for some sort of political bent or that sort of thing, you're never really going to please them. I mean, even when Jodie Whittaker was announced, there were even hardcore people on the left who were upset because she was white and blonde and pretty and stuff like that. So you're never going to win that. So you need to stick with the context of its own science fiction story. So I think there is a genuine exploration here for how the regeneration cycles work and all that sort of thing. It certainly fits in with Doctor Who, so it doesn't mean that it's the end of Doctor Who just because the Doctor became a woman. But if you beat people over the head with it, it's the end of Doctor Who, because Doctor Who's in bad shape already. With some really bad directions and preachiness from the scripts and whatnot. And as far as misandry goes, that's been all over Doctor Who lately, just building and building. And so just turning him into a woman is the least of it, really, at this point. So hopefully that direction will be dropped, but I'm dubious. But the sad thing about all this is like some of the comments about that it's about time there's a woman there, or now we're getting somewhere, or something like that, and this was some kind of female empowerment. It's a bizarre set of circumstances that in order for a woman to be empowered, she has to take over the man or be the man, or, you know, it's weird in that argument when you could have had female characters in their own right, original unto themselves, and establishment. They've been trying to do spin-offs of Doctor Who, and most outside of Torchwood, I think was probably the one that was the most, it had some amount of success. The others just come and go very quickly. And the idea of a female Time Lord spin-off, or Time Lady rather, that's another weird thing. For some reason you can't use feminine pronouns and stuff because somehow that's anti-feminist. I don't know. Anyway, there's been established female characters within Doctor Who were either Time Ladies or certainly related to it. There was the female clone of the Doctor, who was the Doctor's daughter, they called her. River Song, of course. And then Romana, who was from the original series, who could have been back in the series. I always was going to say at the end of time, the mysterious woman at the end of time episode was Romana, even though Davey says, no, that's the Doctor's mother. There's nothing on the screen that suggests that. So, but anyway, and then there's Iris Wildtime, who basically is the female Doctor. But she's originally her own character, you know, and she had her own TARDIS, which was, the double-decker bus. So you have this symbol that's recognizably British and all that. And why not bring her in? Why not see what you can do with that and build on it? Instead of insulting the whole concept by saying, well, I need the man's name, I need the man's title in order to make it. Well, that just tells me you're too lazy and not confident enough to think that you can create this new series, this new character, and build on it. You just don't have what it takes. And that's what I have to conclude here of why something like that was never really attempted. But whatever, it doesn't, it doesn't break a Doctor Who into pieces. It's other things, misandrous language, misandrous ideology and plots and what have you, and dialogue, which has hurt Doctor Who quite a bit lately, and just stories that don't really go anywhere, and plot templates that were just repetitive and terribly boring, and because of the repetition and what have you, that's brought Doctor Who to where it is. There's also the strange element about there was a large female demographic fan base for Doctor Who, and they built on that, but that came out of the Tennant era, where the Tennant's Doctor was a romantic hero, and the romantic fantasy aspect of Doctor Who clearly appealed to female viewers, and that carried on into Matt Smith, of course, with Tennant. The Rose story was the actual romance. Romance was sort of hinted at from the other characters, but it never went as far as that one went. But still, it was there with Matt Smith. And then they went with Peter Capaldi, who I loved. I thought he reminded me of the old show and stuff like that, of his style and everything. But he just didn't fit that. He wasn't the young, dashing man, and the romantic fantasy aspect just wasn't there, even though his Doctor clearly had quite the love for Clara Oswald. But now he was no longer her contemporary, at least aesthetically, age-wise, and so that's how that ended up. So the romantic fantasy aspect was no longer there, and so you lose that audience. The answer to it, of course, would have been to replace him with a young man again to try to recapture that. But they went with this woman, and the idea that this is going to appeal to a female audience, to some aspects, I suppose it would. But, the audience that they created with Tennant, I don't think so. So, we'll see how it happens. If the scripts are good, word of mouth, there's going to be a lot of attention to it when it debuts. I expect the ratings will be very high on the debut show, just out of the curiosity. But boy, if you're going to continue with the same templates you've had, this show's going to dry up within about 3 episodes, and it's going to struggle all the way through. So I don't know. I just don't know. And once again, as I've done in previous videos, all we can do is wait and see. So there you have it, my long-winded rant on the gender swapping within Time Lord regenerations and how I think it works, and what are the likelihood of how many times it would happen over a Time Lord's existence with how many cycles of regeneration they have. So, all right, thanks for listening and watching. Please do like and describe. Like and subscribe. And check out the link description below for some stores that I have for goodies for you. And whatever you shop there and spend will go to help me produce more programs like these.
Say, thanks friends, check out Nailsin Theater at sellfy.com/Nailsin. Yes, there you'll find my poor man Mystery Science Theater treatment of public domain movies that really deserve the treatment. Yes, you can head over there and check out the links to my trailers to such films on my YouTube channel. Yeah, you can preview them and then head over back to sellfy.com/Nailsin and purchase yourself some Mr. Nailsin treatments of movies. I'll be right there to guide you through it.